Hello. Welcome to the key macroeconomic trends about Canada. This video will help you understand Canadian economy. Before we jump to our introduction, let's understand what macroeconomics is and why it is important. Macroeconomics is the study of behavior of economy as a whole. This study is useful for decision making, which includes selecting the alternative with the least opportunity cost. It also helps policymakers and the government draft economic policies. Now let's move to the country profile. Canada is located in the northern half of the North American continent. Its borders extend towards the North Atlantic Ocean to the east, the North Pacific Ocean to the west, the Arctic Ocean to the north, and United States to the south. Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories. It occupies an area of approximately 9,989,670 square kilometers, making it the second largest country in the world by surface area. Canada is so big that it has 6 different time zones. The largest metropolitan cities are Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, with the capital city being Ottawa. Canadian population is highly diverse with approximately 36.5 million people. The aging population is a big worrying factor for Canada as its working population is showing a constant drop. That is what makes Canada an immigrant-friendly country. 1 out of 5 Canadian people are born outside Canada. Canada has 2 official languages. The first one is English and the second one is French. Canada's political system is a federal parliamentary representative democracy, with a formal constitutional democracy. The Queen holds the highest position in the Canadian political structure, followed by the Governor-General, which is appointed by the Queen. The head of the government is the Canadian Prime Minister. This video includes a study of 6 Canadian economic trends which include GDP, population, inflation, unemployment rate, balance of payment, and exchange rate. Now let's talk about GDP growth rate. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. It is the value of all goods and services produced in a country. GDP measures economic growth over a period of time. This graph here shows the Canadian GDP from year 2000 to 2015. The long-term trend line shows a slow decline in the rate of GDP growth rate. However, the real GDP is increasing on average, but at a smaller rate. Real GDP is GDP adjusted for inflation or deflation. We can see that the GDP growth rate peaks in the year 2002, which resulted from the tech bubble. However, since 2006 we can see that the GDP growth rate is dropping and reaching a trough in 2009. This resulted from a financial crisis that originated in the US. Now let's move to our next economic trend. Population. Population is known to be the number of people inhabiting an area. Canada consists of more than 260 different ethnic cultures. The increase of population is mainly due to 2 factors, the first being natural increase and the second being migratory increase. Canadian population has aged, while fertility rate has declined, causing the contribution of natural increase in population to reduce. Natural increase accounts for 1/3 of Canada's population growth, while migratory increase accounts for 2/3 of growth. This graph shows Canada's population growth over the years. Economists have found that as nations become richer, average family size declines. When we compare GDP growth rate with population, we observe an inversely proportionate relationship between both variables. Let's move to our third economic trend. Inflation. Inflation is an upward movement in the average level of prices. GDP deflator is a price index that measures changes in the level of prices of all new goods and services produced in the economy. The shift of GDP deflator can result from the following reasons: lower wages, firms with unsold goods, and lower asset prices. This figure shows a negative long-term trend line that resembles the GDP growth rate. Inflation was at its peak in the year 2000 due to the tech bubble. Alternatively, it went to its lowest point in 2009 because of the financial crisis. Recession from 2006 shows a steady increase in inflation because of cost-push inflation. Cost-push inflation is a continual decrease in aggregate supply recession that turns into deflation. Deflation is the downward movement of the average price level. Let's move on to our next economic trend, unemployment rate. Unemployment rate is the rate of number of unemployed people out of the whole labor force. The unemployed are those who are willing and able to work and who are actively looking for a job. Not all kinds of unemployment affect the economy negatively. Certain unemployment types like structural and frictional are acceptable for the economy. However, cyclical unemployment should be avoided. Higher unemployment rate reduces the labor income and the production of goods and services. The Canadian unemployment rate shows a slight increase in the trend line. It moves up in the year 2000 and 2008 due to the tech bubble and the financial crisis respectively. Now let's move on to the fifth economic trend, balance of payment. Balance of payment refers to the total economic transaction between a nation and the rest of the world. Balance of payment has two major accounts, current and capital. The current account records exports and imports of goods and services, as well as unilateral transfers. The capital account records transactions of purchase, the sale of foreign assets and liabilities during a particular year. Any transaction that leads to a payment is considered a deficit. Any transaction that leads to a receipt is considered a surplus. The Canadian balance of payment graph shows a negative trend line that somewhat resembles the decline in both GDP growth rate and inflation rate. This clearly means that Canada experienced a large deficit in current accounts. To this day, Canada continues to hold a current account deficit. However, this does not mean that Canada holds a weak economy, more so it represents a capital account surplus. This means that Canada is considered to be a great place to invest capital, because of strong prospects for growth and investment opportunities. Now moving on to our last economic trend, exchange rate. Exchange rate is the value of a country's currency with regards to another. Usually Canada adopts a flexible exchange rate, also known as floating exchange rate, meaning that exchange rates are allowed to fluctuate in an open market in response to changes in supply and demand. This graph shows Canada's currency per US dollar. The expansion seen from 2000 to 2015 in the exchange rate can be associated to the fluctuations in the GDP growth rate and inflation rate. During the recessions of the burst of the tech bubble and financial crisis, the value of Canadian currency to the US dollar decreased. The financial crisis that originated in the US caused the GDP to decrease to a point that important goods and services from Canada was no longer appealing. Thank you for listening.